welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining our first ever global community event. So this is kind of one of the big pillars of inspiring psychology practices. Our business is the community aspect, and bringing all the different psychologists together and raising each other up and coming up with new ideas. And another kind of pillar of our business that we want to introduce is this concept of regenerative practices, and how can we make sure that we ourselves as practitioners regenerate ourselves and our clients. How can we bring regenerative practices into society, communities, and even like the environment? And like these are like huge questions that with our day-to-day lives in our practices we don't necessarily have the time to like think about. So we thought, right, let's create these free community events and get everyone together and talk about it, and then maybe we can come up with some ideas. So these events are going to be recorded, as you know, and we're going to edit them and then put them on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, do so. Hannah and Kath's TPPA interviews are on our YouTube channel, I believe. So you can check out their inspiring practices story on there. And yeah, all of these events are going to be on YouTube as well. And we encourage you, if you couldn't come to this event, or if you're at this event and you want to continue the discussion, there's a comment section in YouTube. So continue the discussion there if you couldn't make the event and you want to continue the topic and all of that. So I think maybe if we introduce ourselves, so we're thinking your name, your psychology kind of department or speciality, and the other question was one sentence as to why the topic of today's discussion called to you. So like a short sentence to say, why were you called to this community event? So yeah, maybe if we start with Wendy, and then she can like break the ice and everyone can follow suit.
So I'm Wendy Kendall, and founder. Oh, hi, Sue. You've just joined us for the. Oh, you're so welcome. You've just joined us for the introduction round, and we're really just getting started. With the introductions, we've just asked name, what's your kind of psychology background, psychology discipline, and also and you can be a really indisciplined psychologist, you know, we're quite open to that. And also then just a sentence about why this topic called to you, and why this community event kind of resonated with you. So I'm just going to start. Wendy Kendall, I'm the lead coach in Inspiring Psychology Practices, and this topic called to me because I obviously been, helping various psychologists in private practice over the last 4 years. Sorry, my background is that I'm an organizational psychologist, and I've been helping psychologists in their private practice. And in particular, the last 18 months have taken so much out of psychologists. And at the same time, we're looking at all these systemic issues. And I started to wonder about, what can we do as psychologists to rebuild ourselves, rebuild the people around us? And we do a lot of that already, but can we do it more on purpose? And also rebuild community, society, and even environment around us, whether it's local or global environment. And so that was really what called me, this question. I don't know the answers to it, and I don't have solutions yet. So I figured I would call on my colleagues around the world to come and let's just discuss this, open the conversation. That's me. So who's next? Oh, Kath, did you want to speak? You're muted.
Yes. So my name's Kath Baverstock, and my specialism is, oh, you can't see me. I'm just going to put my video on. And my specialism is burnout and women predominantly, although I do work with men as well. And the topic of regeneration is very close to my heart, because part of the work that I do is very much around feminine empowerment, but that's not just gender. That's just just looking at how, you know, our conditioning affects us, and the fact that we're so conditioned, I think, to be on the go all of the time and generating all of the time, and that actually that's kind of against our nature. And I think working more with cycles, and I've just done a post, as you know, tonight about inner winter, and I just think it's really, I'm very passionate about it, because I think it's something that we can kind of embody ourselves, and then as we embody it ourselves, we reap the benefits of that, and then we model to others how that can be, and that, you know, we don't have to burn out, and we don't have to you know, end up feeling unwell, and there are other ways. So yeah, very passionate about this.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kath.
Shall I go next?
Yeah, go on.
Hi, I'm Hannah Bryan. My background training is in clinical psychology, and I work full-time in private practice now. My business kind of has 3 different strands to it, really, all focused on kind of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So this part where I train and supervise people and facilitate on the courses to help people qualify as EMDR therapists and support that. And I've got a part where I provide therapy to clients that have experienced trauma and gone through difficult times, and just growing and developing now a bit of a coaching branch as well, where looking at helping and supporting people that have significant goals and moments that they're working towards in their life, and helping people work towards that. So that the final bit has come through the work that I've done on TPPA this past year, which for me really links to the regeneration and thinking about re-energizing. And what's the word that you were using, Wendy? My mind's gone blank now.
There's a few things. So sometimes I talk about restoration, but then it's regeneration.
Yeah.
But I think re-energizing is, you know, all part and parcel of it.
Yeah. And I think so it's really called to me today, after this is my first week back after trying to take the whole of August off to regenerate and just recharge a little bit, and finding that it can often take me a long time to switch off and start to personally to kind of reconnect and get myself firing on all cylinders again. So I think it's so important. And after working in the NHS for 19 years or something, a long time, I was feeling that I was going through cycles quite a lot of getting close to burnout, which I know is a lot of the work that Kath has thankfully created, and just see it as being so important now. You know, I don't know whether it's because I'm getting older, but just you've got to look after and just keep things going in that way. So for me, really important.
Perfect.
Pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. So Sue, it's a joy to meet you. I think you're muted at the moment. I can see a little red. It's the saying of 2020 and 2021.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hi. So I'm Sue, counselling psychologist. Left the NHS end of last year because, similarly, getting close to burnout. I was working in an IAPT service and was just desperate to have more control over my life, really. So now I'm in private practice, and I think I was drawn to this because private practice is just so isolating, as well as, all that we've been through in the last year. And so wanting to reach out to more psychologists, but also just very aware of how exhausting it's been, and so wanting to regenerate as well. So so both those things really.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. So Ava, introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Ava. I'm Managing Director of Inspiring Psychology Practices. I am not yet qualified as a psychologist, but I am I'm starting this month my university master's to go into sports psychology. And so, yes, I'm right at the beginning of my psychology journey. And I was drawn to this topic of regeneration because I did my undergraduate degree in environmental science. So this aspect of, yes, regeneration, needing to find new ideas and make a difference and a change in how we live. And I've always been interested in like linking different aspects. So this idea of regenerating ourselves, making sure we're happy, we don't burn out, but also like the question of how in a psychology practice can you restore the environment. I think that it's not thought about that much, but how cool would it be if we could find a way of doing that? And similarly, like how can we restore society and communities and these wider topics? Like us as individuals, we do have a responsibility and we do have the power to do that. So yeah, bringing all our ideas together at these kind of events seems great. So yeah.
And if it's okay, I'm just going to read out Alice's. Alice Brown is listening in, but mentioned that she's getting her little one to sleep at the moment, so she's being the silent participant. But Alice, we're very grateful for your presence, and I'm very mindful of how important presence is. So I just want to add that in, which is, so it says, "Hi everyone, I'm Alice. My background is in educational psychology, but following severe burnout earlier this year, I'm moving away from local authority work. Not too sure yet towards what exactly, but my specialisms are children in care, early trauma and family work. I've always been interested in community psychology, and despite my training, including the big component of community psychology, I've never been able to use these skills fully. So it's lovely to join together to answer some of the big questions that are needing creative solutions at the moment." Yeah, I really resonate with that as well. This idea of coming together to help create solutions with one another. Perfect. Okay, so we had a little bit of a format. I think earlier in the day, we just sent out a couple of questions to provide a bit of structure to this session. My idea was to use a couple of appreciative inquiry questions. I'm a big believer in appreciative inquiry. I don't know if any of you have ever worked with that methodology, but it's a system of inquiry, a system of exploration that is also built on some of the living systems principles that are part of what we know, or what has been proposed out there in terms of regenerative principles for business. So it seemed appropriate to apply that kind of framework. The first part of the appreciative inquiry method is called discovery. And the idea is to look at what's already living, what already works, where does it work already, so that we're more mindful of preserving what works already. And so there's two questions that we had, which were, I think, Ava, you've got them written down, right?
Yeah, yes. I'll say them now. So the first one was, what gives life to our practices? So the idea of like what's already working and what gives life to your practice.
So I just wanted to leave it quite open to debate the question, to debate your experiences, to bring in your perspectives, to raise more questions. It's a very open and loose discussion at this point. But the main thing is, I'm going to perhaps type it in the chat box. Thank you, Ava. What gives life to our practices?
what I thought was interesting in the way that I was coming from it, and over your point at the end about thinking about bringing your experience from your undergrad and thinking about nature and regenerating in that way, was that very much what I was thinking about was on an individual level, kind of, how can I look after myself so that I can then help to re-energize other people and to pass that on in that way. And it was just interesting that that you'd come at it from a different perspective, which is opened your mind to different ways of thinking about things, I suppose, doesn't it? So then I was thinking with that life at the heart of the private practice, which I think, or the practices that we provide, is kind of us and what we bring to the business, to the practice, to the patients that we see, to the clients that we meet with. So that was my first thought there.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, practice is centered around what we bring to it. And it sounds really obvious to say that, but so many of us, Sue, you mentioned that too, we're coming sometimes from a place of being really burnt out. So nevertheless, we're bringing that life force into our practice the whole time. So what's your perspective on this question?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was finding it quite hard to think of anything. What came into my head was, rather than life, but light. I work with a lot of people with a lot of shame, and so as soon as they hear, well, lots of people have that, or lots of people experience that, and that they're not on their own. That sense of, I suppose it's connection, feeling that they're not on their own with something. That to me gives a sense of light to sessions. That kind of huge relief that can be there. That's just what popped into my head.
I love that perspective, that the part of the question, or what it brought up for you, that question was about a real resource, which is that sense of light coming into quite a dark place where people have perhaps felt trapped in shame. And that's everything. At that point, it's like the first kind of life-giving force, that sense of light coming in. So I love that idea. And you mentioned there about connection being life-giving, therefore. And I really agree with that. And yet earlier you mentioned how challenging private practice can be, because it can feel quite isolating, and that's kind of the flip side. So it's like one of the life-giving pillars of our practices is how we can is the more connection the better, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so, because otherwise it can be so hard to try and work out something on your own. Yes. And so being able to kind of bounce things off people and say, well, what do you think? So the more we have kind of communities of people that can, talk to one another about things. But I think I'm probably taking us off the subject a bit, but
it's also fine for us to meander as we discover and uncover. So don't worry about it being off topic at all. Okay, so welcome, Paula. We just started in this first question, which was around what brings life to our practice. So Kath, I don't know if you have anything to kind of add to that. I can imagine you have a lot to say about some of those topics.
You don't want to get me started, do you, on that?
I do want to get you started on that.
I think that's a really interesting theme, that one of connection, and that came up for me as well, in a, that in a way, if we're connected within, and connected to our earth as well, and connected to the cycles and the rhythms and the kind of natural regenerative processes, then that in itself sustains us so much better than working in that much more linear way where we're always expected to be performing, or producing, I think is the word. It's almost like we're expected to be harvesting 100% of the time, and that's just not sustainable. It's not. It's just. It is a path to burnout. And unfortunately, a lot of organisations are arranged around that idea. And I think if only some of that more ancient wisdom could be connected back to, that idea that it's seasonal, isn't it? It's it's not just always, we're not always in that productive phase. If that makes sense. Sometimes we are, and sometimes we need that time to stand back and reflect in order so that we can remain creative. Because if we're expected to be creative and productive and all of the time, it's just not sustainable. So then, we end up with a model of burnout and crash and boom and whatever else goes on. I don't know if you have anything else to say to that, Wendy, but it seems to me that, there does need to be another way of thinking about how we operate.
I love that, Kath, what you said about harvesting, because that again brings nature into it, doesn't it? And thinking that we know it's not just about the harvesting, that you've got to do the sowing and the planting and the watering and the nurturing.
You've got to do the fertilizing.
Yeah.
And you've got to wait as well. You've got to wait. You've got to have patience.
Yes.
Over the winter period. And that's the kind of hardest part, isn't it? When you're just, when you've got that little seed on your windowsill, you're like, come on, just grow. It doesn't just grow, does it? It takes time. And, I think sometimes in our cultures, in our societies, we just don't have patience. We just want it all now and everything to happen just like that.
That made me reflect on something there, Kath, which is an experience. The value of the experience of waiting, the value of the experience of not knowing, and the value of the experience of the surprise, like the sort of joy when you see that first shoot come through, whether that's with a seed that you've planted or whether it's with an idea that you've planted and nurtured. And there's something deeply joyful about that. And I think one of the things that I got really curious about as I did my IFS training and kind of incorporating some of those ideas in my coaching practice is about how we can work so hard and lose our connection with joy. And so I just got really curious about, where's all the joy gone? Like, what can we do that brings joy back into this? And what you just highlighted there is how important the waiting, the not knowing, the stillness is to that experience of joy, because it's kind of part of the same coin almost, or part of the...
Yeah, you kind of need the winter and that quietness and that kind of, because it's not, we have this idea of being like nothing happening. There's just nothing happening, but there's just so much regeneration within under the soil going on. And without that, then we can't have the spring and all of the beauty that springs up in that period of time. And I think we go through cycles, like inner cycles, but it's almost as though some organizations don't allow for that to be the case. but then they suffer from people burning out and leaving. And then, you know, I mean, the NHS is a great example of that. And then they end up having to get temporary workers in who perhaps aren't a specialist at the job, and then you've got problems with, you know, nurses coming onto wards who don't know the patients, and you know, you get into this kind of cyclical kind of burnout. And just I think there is a lot to learn from nature, and I think we've kind of forgotten some of the lessons.
Reminded me what you were talking about there, Kath, is at the moment we consume a lot, and the kind of rule is that the nature's resources are infinite, which we know they're not. And so like what you were saying there with practitioners and psychologists, and people are leaving, but then we assume, oh, it's fine, there's these temporary workers, this is an infinite resource. Well, no, like we're going to reach a tipping point where, well, we probably have reached some kind of tipping point, for example, with the NHS, where there's just not the resources there anymore. And so
there's a kind of barrenness that starts to set in, and I think that set in quite a long time ago actually in the NHS, but it was almost like nobody really wanted to think about it. I think it was too painful for people to contemplate, because of course people want the NHS, but you know, I think there is a very stark reality to the NHS in particular, using that as an example, that people are incredibly burnt out, and you know, what happens then?
I have some comments to make on that as an organisational psychologist, but Paula, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of come in. I don't know if you've any reflections on what you've heard so far.
Yeah, thank you. I've just literally come from a client session, so I'm a little bit but I get it. I was just thinking just when you were talking about, you know, the nature and seasons and cycles and burnout. I grew up in South Africa, and one of the kind of parts of the natural cycle, particularly in the bush, are fires. And so that idea of burning out as a kind of cleansing mechanism, and, you know, the beautiful green shoots that come from that. And I guess I was just thinking about myself, and having come, you know, had a real kind of change in my own life direction facing burnout in the NHS, and how I feel like in the last year, just in such a different place. I feel my shoots are, you know, blossoming and growing in a really exciting, creative way. And I think that wouldn't, you know, I think I would have just been like this stagnant kind of, you know, just that, you know, I think, Kath, your word barren, that's how I felt. You know, just my work was so not fruitful, and so like a drought, you know. And maybe, so I suppose, you know, it's painful, I guess, but something about, for an individual, that process of maybe facing crisis, if, you know, if you can survive that, being an opportunity for new growth and new starts. But I think the organizational stuff is harder.
Yeah. And so to me, a little theme that is popping in my mind from our discussion here is about, I mean, obviously the cyclical stuff is wonderful, and we can see evidence of that. Sue, you mentioned about how some of your clients that have experienced a lot of shame and feel in a really dark place come to you, and they receive that light, they get that sense of hope, which in itself then becomes a resource for growth. And Paula, you're mentioning there about, you know, how being burned out is actually perhaps also preparing the soil somehow for the new shoots to come through, and, you know, to clear it, to get rid of and to clear. And I love that very empowered perspective on burnout, which is, it's burnt things away now. And having been through burnout myself many years ago, when I, you know, left my public sector job, it was then a time for renewal, but it was flipping hard. And so, and I think one of the things I found really hard about it was isolation at the time. It's super hard when you're on your own, but it's having hope, having that connection, having, and so to me that, I see a kind of natural systems metaphor for our psychology practices in what we're sharing there, which is this metaphor of scorched earth, barrenness, but with potential. And when we bring in some of that hope and light and so on, then there's opportunity for newness. Reflecting on the organizational aspects, I've not worked in the NHS in depth like some of you guys have. I worked in Ministry of Defence because I was a military psychologist for 7 years. But from what I've understood, there have been very big efficiency drives in both of those organizations. So everything then was geared to a very mechanical model, which is, can we tweak this machine and re-engineer this machine and re-engineer so that it is maximally productive. And that mechanical metaphor is exactly, on a global scale, what's driven us to this point, this overproduction, overconsumption, without, as you said, Ava, this idea of, are the resources really renewable that are coming into this? So NHS needs a natural systems.
It's reminding me then, Wendy, about some of the things that I remember the NHS bringing in to increase productivity and efficiency, which was, I think it was called something like the lean model, which was based on the Toyota factory car production. Yeah, what can you say?
Yeah. Oh, look, the nuts and bolts have fallen off. Yeah. I just wanted to bring some of Alice's comments in, because I've seen that she's commented in the chat at the side. Alice mentioned in response to Sue's point, I think that's such an important point, Sue. I miss the collaborative opportunities that naturally occur when employed versus in private practice. And again, I think, if we look around at nature, collaboration is as much a model in nature as competition is, or even a more powerful model, perhaps.
It's certainly a more feminine model, I would suggest.
Yes, you have a lot to say about this. So I'm intrigued, Kath, about your perspective on, the feminine and masculine.
I suppose just from an
energy.
organisational perspective, you've had much more experience than I have, but I've worked in a fair few organisations, and it seems as though that there's different types of models. One is the kind of competitive model, you're kind of hierarchical and you're kind of competing for a scarce resource, so to speak, and you're kind of trying to sort of trample on one another to try and get to the top, and everything feels quite stressful potentially and not particularly collaborative. And then so I would suggest that on the whole is a slightly more masculine based model, and then a more feminine based model goes back to a more sort of ancient cultures where perhaps women were more honoured for their wisdom and consulted, and that often there was more collaboration between them and between not just the women but the entire community about how things could be organised. And I'm not trying to sort of paint a completely perfectionist picture of those times and those communities, but I do think there's something lost in that collaboration, that more collaborative stance. And I think now structures are breaking down. It's almost as though we kind of need to take more note of those leadership models and those ways of operating if we are going to kind of adapt and develop in a more healthy, productive way. And that's just my perspective on it. I don't know what your perspective is on that, Wendy.
I guess what comes to mind for me as well is that I think that it really taps into that bigger picture comment, I don't know if it's a comment or a question, but this bigger theme, which is how, from a psychology point of view, how westernized and how dominant that westernized culture has been in psychology, and therefore how open we are to where there are already and still existing those collaborative community-based models. I was looking at one of the models, I think it's called Tree of Life model, which is something that was developed by a South African researcher. I had a quick look at it last week.
Michael White. Was it Michael White?
And I think somebody else as well.
It's, Nikizelo
Yes.
Mkube Mlilo. Yeah, she's a Zimbabwean. She works in South Africa. And it's not
Wonderful.
Michael White, it's another of his colleagues, but yeah.
Another one of his, I can't remember.
Right, yeah, exactly. This
kind of grew out of that body of work though, didn't it? That kind of narrative.
The narrative, it's a narrative approach,
Right. So that's what it calls to mind. We're kind of closed off a little bit in certain areas of psychology. Again, one of my biggest things is, can we break down barriers between psychologists? Can we break down barriers to people entering psychology? Because I strongly believe that we have the resources and the capability to solve a lot of these problems if we work together, but there's too many barriers in the way. So how do we identify those barriers and break them down? Whether it's breaking down barriers to people coming to therapy, and I hesitate to say therapy because I'm thinking into some kind of community or connection that helps to resource them, rather than it just having to be a therapy model. Anyway, I'm kind of getting on a bit of a soapbox there. So one of the things I wondered if we might think about, because we're getting towards 10 to the hour, so we're deep into this hour's discussion. Ava, we've got a second question there, which I think could be useful. Do you have it for us?
Yeah, and it kind of leads on from our first question, which is what currently gives life in your practice. And so the second question is, how can we maximize this life-giving quality or the life-giving elements in your practice? How can we maximize them and regenerate them and make them stronger?
So I guess it's perhaps thinking of some more pragmatic ideas of thinking about what grows and what's good and what's life-giving at the moment, and how do we do more of that? And I don't know the answer to that either. Thanks, Ava. Alice has put a couple of comments in here as well, talking about the constant busyness, the idea of the constant business resonating so much, not having time to pause and loving the ideas of seasons. And then Paula, she said to you, such a powerful and hopeful message, Paula, reminds me of the work that was being done on restoring resilience and just the power of narratives in general. And yeah, narratives is one of those things perhaps that could be, how can we use narratives to maximize the life-giving forces of our practices? What do you do now that helps restore you, and how do you do more of it?
I've been thinking a lot about kind of habits and how doing little things but often can really I don't know, lead us in a good direction. I can't remember the book that I just read about atomic habits.
Yeah.
he talks about if you set somebody's course, like a plane's course, just only slightly differently by like 1% or something, it'll end up at like a different, like in Sydney rather than Melbourne or something like that. So it is a big difference that the momentum and little and often things can really do. So I think that one of the things that I've noticed I try and incorporate into my life and do for others is thinking about those little things that you can have as a habit and a routine, and just something that builds and builds and builds. And for me, it's like meditation and journaling and those kind of nurturing qualities that I find really help in the long run.
That just reminds me so much of the conversations we've had about the power of moments.
Yeah.
About that being a really kind of powerful thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think sometimes we can kind of lose ourselves in kind of over planning for the future and worrying about this and worrying about that, and actually bringing ourselves back to that present moment is so powerful. And we all forget to do it, don't we? Because we all get caught up in things. Because I'd say that was a fundamental part of the work that I do. But yeah, I sometimes think, do I practice what I preach? Sometimes I forget and get so caught up. But actually, the power of connecting to the present, and then thinking of, and that's when the creativity and the solutions can come through, and actually much better suited solutions, rather than those sort of overthinking, anxious kind of thoughts about over controlling and over planning. And it's a balance, isn't it? It's a balance. And I think if you're in that, if you're connected to the present moment, then you are more in balance. Therefore, what you create is more balanced. So for me, that's just such an important part of, well-being, is to be able to connect to the present. But we're not conditioned to do that, are we? And I think that's one of the problems we've got. We're not really conditioned to do that very much.
There was something else there about how I've completely lost my thread now. How we don't notice those little moments, do we? And it's like we want to kind of, in a way, switch off that cognitive part of ourselves that overthinks things through. And that, in a way, that's interesting, because when we talk about trauma and how people are traumatized and that the thinking part of the brain switches off, and we see that sometimes as being in a negative way, but actually when we might meditate, when we might connect with the now, a lot of it is turning off that thought, isn't it, and thinking, what's the felt sense, how is it in this moment? So I don't know where that was leading me, but that was just what you were making me think of then, Kath.
Love that.
Yeah, and then you're sort of engaging the parasympathetic, aren't you, in the rest digest state. And I just think you come up, you're more able to receive. That's what I notice, when you're in that rest and digest, whatever, whether you're walking in nature, whether you're meditating, whatever you're doing, Tai Chi, I don't know. Everyone does it differently, but you're much more able to, that is also such an important part of our lives. And it seems to me that's the part that gets eradicated or isn't practiced enough, because that's when the ideas come as well, isn't it? They always talk about, the shower, being in the shower, and then something happens. It's not when you're actually busy doing something. So how can we bring more kind of, like you were saying, I think that word you were using, Hannah, was like nurture. How can we nurture ourselves so that then we have more capacity to be productive? And it's like that deep self-care as well, isn't it? Rather than that that. I think we were talking about that today, Wendy, weren't we? Talking about haircuts. Do you remember?
About what, sorry?
About haircuts, you know, you were telling me about the haircut that when back in the day.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That sometimes we have this idea of what self-care is, but that actually self-care, deep self-care is what we're talking about, isn't it? And that's not something that many people really know about generally. I think it's sort of beginning to drip in, but I think still people have an idea of going to the spa is their self-care rather than a deeper type of self-care, if that makes sense.
Yeah, my main approach is compassion focused therapy, which brings in a lot of Buddhist psychology and talks a lot about the intention, setting the intention. So what I've been trying to do, and I think it draws on this kind of the atomic habits, is I've been trying to just each day kind of catch myself in all this whirlwind and just have the attention of, okay, what's one really good thing that I could do for myself just at this moment? And that might be reaching out to somebody, or it might be something of a different type of self-care, like, you know,
having a cup of tea.
Something that feels nice, and a cup of tea, you know, anything, but just from that position of the intention is caring for myself. And but I still have to remind myself to do it. But it's I find that doing it that way, that when I've got the choice, all I'm saying to myself is my commitment is that I'll do one thing a day that's about looking after myself. Whereas if I have a to-do list of every day thou shalt do this, I'm going to rebel, and I'll ignore it, and I'll stick something on top of it and whatever.
We complicate it, don't we?
Yeah.
By having lists of, we're going to achieve all these things, and actually it's just about connecting to those moments, isn't it? As you're saying.
Alice has just commented that about that idea of doing what your mind and body needs rather than perhaps what you want in the moment. So that speaks to me about tuning into what does my mind and body need right now, as opposed to, do I want to eat the chocolate bar?
Do I want to drink a glass of wine, or do I need a nice herbal tea? It's always a dilemma, right?
different parts of us need and want different things, that's for sure, all the time. Yeah, definitely. Something that all reminds me of, and I love, because we started at this really big global topic and bringing it right back down to where can we be powerful in our own lives? And I think that is such a fundamental question for our psychology practices, whether it's how we show up in our psychology practices, or whether it's how we model that and support our clients. And then, that question ricochets out to communities and societies. But where can we be most powerful, even in the smallest way, at the smallest amount of time? A friend of mine who's also an IFS therapist, she's been doing some training in polyvagal theory, and we've been sharing notes, and she was talking about ventral glimmers. I don't know if you've ever done any training with Deb Dana about this idea of just, are there times when you can catch yourself, just that little bit of it? And it reminded me of what you said, Sue, about bringing in light, that even if the light is just a glimmer, can we catch ourselves in that moment and savor it? So this whole topic of savoring, I don't know how much we use savoring in our private practices. What do we savor? I don't know. I literally, I'm setting it as an intention for myself to start thinking about what I savor in my private practice. What are the moments that where I could experience that ventral connection, that glimmer, and just hold it a bit longer and just kind of maybe expand it a little bit. I don't know if you've ever come across any of that PVT work or.
No, but is it Rick Hanson, American psychologist and neuroscientist, who talks a lot about holding on to the positive.
Yeah.
So often we just let it just disappear within seconds, whereas we need to hold on to it and savor it. And then it becomes a stronger memory.
Yes.
And so then it's going to become, it's easier for us to draw on it if it's a stronger memory. But otherwise, we're just drawing on the negative.
Yeah. And that kind of links to the narrative stuff as well, doesn't it? About like problem-saturated stories, and I can't remember what it was now, but the alternative positive stories that often get sort of saturated with all the bad things, you know.
Yeah.
And it also links to EMDR as well. I mean, Hannah might want to say more about that, but you know, connecting to different memory networks and how then it's kind of easier to feel good feelings rather than be on that default to negative emotion.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly with the a lot of forward thinking work that we're doing now with EMDR, we try and think about, you know, when is a time in your life when you have felt powerful, in control, or different kinds of skills and qualities. And it's amazing to sit with people and get them to remember those moments, those moments.
Felt moments, yeah.
Really powerful.
I think that really underlines for me, I'm saying this as an organizational psychologist who works a lot with clinical and counseling psychologists, and I know a lot of clinical and counseling psychologists have been thinking about how they move into coaching, and also then thinking about, is it okay to do coaching when there seems to be so much distress and so much need for what we do in terms of therapy? And for me, bringing those discussion points together, that all of that just really underlines for me the absolute importance for you guys and me, and you know, in different ways, and Ava also in different ways from a sports psychology perspective, of doing those things that help people connect with glimmers, connect with the positive narratives, to reconnect with their, you know, whatever positive memory networks that they have, which are resources for them to tap into, because regenerating ourselves and our communities and our relationships and society and everything else is not about fixing, not just about fixing the damage that was done. That's the whole point of regeneration, that it's beyond sustainability and it's putting good back into the system. So if you ever want to reflect on why you should also have a coaching practice as a clinical psychologist or a counseling psychologist, then there's your answer as far as I'm concerned. Okay, one thing I want to say, because it just really struck me, and for me it was really a key insight, is how we've had this habit of villainizing what actually could be quite life-giving states. In that, we've talked here about the darkness before the light appears, and the power of experiencing that hope and that light, and also the power of burnout to be a context for new shoots of growth. And you know, in IFS we talk about all parts are welcome, and that would also mean, and I think that's a really, I don't know, I'm going to have to sit with this idea, because I feel really fearful about the destruction that's happened around us, and I wonder how it might feel to sit with the possibility of that destruction. In other words, what could be possible.
Could you say a bit more about what do you mean about the destruction? The destruction of?
the destruction of the environment that's happened, the destruction of our communities and societies, the inequality that is rampant. I felt, really polarized with that. Like, I want to fight it, like I want to overcome it, like I want it to be gone, I want it to never have happened. Maybe there is something really precious about the transformative. I feel really ambivalent about it. I feel more ambivalent about it than I did previously. That means I'm probably going a bit more in the direction of, being able to connect with it.
I get the sense that more people are having conversations about how we want things to be different. And I think more people are really tuning into things like inequality, as well as climate change. So I guess that's my only sense of what positive is coming out of it, is because it's becoming so obvious that there is maybe the possibility that there could be a bigger change of systems, of wider systems. But whether it's going to happen fast enough, for me, that's the concern, that there's so many forces trying to stop and keep the status quo. But
I wonder whether the process of kind of, one of the things, because I wrote my post on winter tonight, and it did occur to me that actually, in a way, the COVID, the whole situation with COVID was almost like created a global winter. But I didn't put it in because I was a bit kind of like, well, I don't know whether, because obviously people have lost people, important to them, and I think you have to be quite careful about saying that this is all a good thing, because
no, exactly,
it's not all a good thing, and these processes aren't always good. You were saying yourself, when you're burnt out, when you're feeling terrible, you feel like absolute rubbish. And I work with people who are burnt out and they just feel just terrible. But that, sometimes there has to be these kind of periods of time where things fall away and die off. And I'm not saying that people should die off, but I'm just talking about it as a kind of process, and that it's almost, I don't know, I did leave it out because I thought it might be quite a sort of potentially painful for some people to kind of think about that. But it is an interesting kind of phenomena that the pandemic has created, this kind of sense of everybody's had to go within more. That's the point. So just picking up on the point from Sue, which was that I think people are questioning things more. And I don't know what that's going to lead to, but I can only think that is a good thing, because things do need to change. Like, people's lifestyles do need to change, and I work with a lot of wealthy people, in my local area, and a lot of people are starting to wonder whether all of this, what does it all mean? Do we need to live such elaborate, complex lives? And actually the things that make us happy are quite simple. And that kind of goes back to those simple moments thing. But that's gonna evolve, that's gonna ask quite a change, and I think there is a sea change, and personally I find that quite exciting idea. But I think there's gonna have to be a lot of, I don't know, I feel like there's gonna have to be quite a lot of forest fires.
There's something about sitting with the two experiences, which is what we do, what we try to hold space for a lot in our practices anyway. Both the pain, the duality, and the possibility.
The duality.
Exactly. Alice, sorry, Hannah.
I was just thinking, Kath, because I was doing some writing today for some social media posts about what you'd said a couple of weeks ago in one of your posts as well, which ties in with what if our wounds were our ones,
Exactly.
and you know, that thinking about post-traumatic growth and what comes out of that. And yeah, it does feel a bit like, are we saying that it doesn't matter what happened? And it's not saying that, but there's something in the darkness and the deep experience that can lead to change in a positive direction. But yeah, even saying that now loud, I feel a bit like cautious about all.
Yeah, it's important to be able to say it, you know, so that you can then kind of think about where that leads, because I think sometimes we just sort of don't say things, but actually, you know, it's a bit like, oh, you know, we don't want to talk about that bad experience we had because just it will just be better if we just cover it all up. But actually, you know, sometimes it feels really painful, but by reprocessing it, you end up with incredible potential transformation and such gifts of insight and, you know, enlightenment. And so for me, I just feel very committed to that idea that, you know, we do need to work through these processes and make sense of them rather than just cover them over and pretend they don't exist.
I think that's a really good point. I just want to bring in Alice's point from the comments where she mentioned, I think it's a really interesting way to think about it. In terms of climate change, I do often think that while it will have a devastating impact on humans and life on Earth, the Earth will still be here. And maybe it needs time to regenerate without us, which could be a possibility, right?
Possibly not a popular view.
Not a popular view. Well, I know, but I think, but your point of like, let's share these things. These are things that are painful to talk about, but it's what we do also as psychologists, right? And also, Paula, as you mentioned, maybe the planet will be better off without us. That's a possibility, definitely. I think what I would like to do to kind of bring this community discussion to a close is really just ask you for any reflections on if anything has kind of touched you or shifted you tonight. What would you take from that? Especially if it's something that you think you might take into your practice and maybe amplify it a little more or maximize it a little more or bring some more intention to it and so on. Okay, so I want to open it to whoever's got some ideas. I've got a couple of things, but yeah.
I was thinking about savouring the moments, and I think I like just being away for August, I was really mindful of like when I was on the beach and you know, just pausing and noticing how I felt and really savouring that moment. And you know, as we were talking, I could visualize myself back there, which was lovely. But I thought I want to do that a bit more in my day-to-day with my what the work that I'm doing, because I have those moments, but sometimes I don't think I put the spotlight on them as much. So I want to perhaps move forward and even tomorrow notice some moments at the end of the day that have been, or when I'm in them, it's probably the best moment to pause and just feel that and see how that feels.
Yeah, love that. Thanks, Hannah. Anyone else?
I just occurred to me that, you know, this idea of speaking about those ideas that sometimes you hold back, and that actually it's really important to be able to talk about things that, you know, are potentially, you know, could be controversial or could be very new or could be, I don't know, potentially painful, I suppose, but that actually that process is quite important. And so for me, I think it's about, because I've been working a bit more about being a bit braver in therapy when I'm working with people, and actually sort of saying things, not you know, not going overboard, but just being a bit more brave in saying the unspoken things.
Yeah.
And I'm really getting good results, by the way. So yeah, there's something for me about saying those unspoken, talking about those things that are less obvious, perhaps less, you know, in the dark spaces. That then creates that light. So yeah.
That's a brilliant title for a blog post as well. Well, I said that. Speaking of the dark places. Yeah, I love that. The value of them. So, how about you?
I think I'm going to go back to the little habits and that whole idea of 5 minutes a day. Something that I say to clients over and over again, you know, if you do something for 5 minutes each day, how much it'll add up to. Do I do it for myself? Yeah. So, so yeah, I'm gonna
Wonderful.
You're going to commit to it this time.
try to.
Yeah, good on you. Set the intention anyway.
Yeah.
Paula, how about yourself?
I was thinking that idea about the seasonality and how it relates to productivity, and the idea of that you don't have to be harvesting all the time right now, and that actually you know, the things that go before are as important, and sometimes it's a time, you know, a season for rest, or you know, like bulbs don't flower until they've been through a cold winter. So, you know, all those kind of you know, the cycles that we go through, and just being able to feel okay about listening to what we need, rather than being so pulled into the striving and everything needs to be now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Wonderful. Alice has commented, she was also saying definitely the point about savouring, same snap with Hannah. And she mentioned that she was recently listening to a webinar in safe and brave spaces, which are so needed for these discussions. I think that's a really great way of describing it.
Spaces is lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. So Ava, I want to open that up to you as well. What are you taking from this discussion?
I kind of got a bit of maybe an epiphany moment is a bit of a strong word for it, but so I'm, as well as working with the inspiring psychology practice, I'm in the sporting world and the kind of elite sporting world and wanting to go into sports psychology, but I'm also an athlete, and in the last year I've experienced burnout 100%, and Hannah's helped me with like EMDR stuff to tap back into like the love of sport. But I just, when you were talking about burnout and constantly wanting to harvest, and the whole point of elite sport is you are trying to gain every single percentage of improvement you can day in, day out to reach this major goal. Whether, I mean, we've just had the Olympics, and for some people it's getting that Olympic gold, and there's nothing about this seasonality, and if you're having a period where you're not improving, that being the almost the default excuse is that you're not good enough. That's why you've reached your max. It's maybe actually you're experiencing a winter where you need to have that patience and sit with it, and maybe it's uncomfortable, but like you'll see the shoots again. But there's none of that in that industry. And I can imagine it's similar to other organizations, like in corporates, where it's like climbing that ladder and you're trying to get that 1% improvement all the time. And probably feel quite passionate about solving all of that now. I want to go into sports psychology, but I want to solve all of that out and change the whole thing.
A different model of sports psychology.
Yeah,
there
exactly.
we go. I love it. Just thinking about what am I taking from that? I'd written something down. This idea of working on the small parts where you're powerful, because it goes back to a bit of trauma history. I probably need to do some IFS with a part of me that has felt powerless in the past, and there's times when I can still connect with that younger part of me that sometimes just feels like completely overburdened by all of this stuff. And the thing that me and that young part has taken this evening from it is, you know, it's okay to work on the smaller parts where you feel powerful still. You don't have to feel as though it's the whole thing. It's okay to work on the bits where you do have that power to shape something. That's okay for that to be enough. That is enough. You know, you are enough is a whole story.
And maybe those powerless parts have a really important part.
Okay. That's very meta.
Yeah.
I'll have to contemplate that.
Just throw that one in there.
Oh, and Alice has just commented, I was looking into self-care practices from the world and loved the Italian voce fa niente. Laura, I know you're going to be listening to this, and I hope I said that okay. Our colleague Laura Villa is Italian. The sweetness of doing nothing. Yeah. Yeah, we need more of that in our psychology practices as well, I think. Perfect. Guys, thanks so much for joining us for this inaugural community discussion. And we're just looking to, you know, keep on growing the discussions. When we get this recording out, and it'll be available on the YouTube channel, if you could also share it, that would be awesome. And just, I just want to find ways of connecting with people and bringing them together. Our intention was to have this every other month. We'll see how the timescales go with everything. And what we'll do is we'll build on and look at how we also then repurpose this content that we've created, because there's such a huge amount of value in our discussion that actually, you know, we can take the moments and also make them more powerful as well. Thanks ever so much, Sue. It was a great pleasure to meet you. And I don't know if you're on Facebook, but we have a group there in Facebook called Inspiring Psychology Practices, if you want to come and join in with us. So the invitation's there if you want to stay connected. It'd be wonderful to have you along. Paula, it was lovely to see you again, and I know you've had a long day, so it was really a pleasure to have your participation. I love your perspective also from South Africa. It's wonderful. Alice, I hope you're okay. I don't know if you can still hear me. I hope your little one is settling down and that you enjoy a restful evening. Hannah, always wonderful to have you along. And Ava, thanks so much for facilitating this and also getting all the tech stuff sorted today. It's been fantastic.
Thanks.
Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. It's been really lovely.
Bye. Take care. Bye.